1985 was host to some of the most iconic films in the industry's history. Clue is a favorite of mine, but I also realize its major downfalls. Its cult status has given it a lot of praise over the last 35 years, but most people remember it as either a classic comedy or a failed attempt. This video will be in two parts to explore both ideals, as I, myself, agree with both. Clue is a great attempt at adaptation. It helps that the source material was very bendable, but they really went out of their way to incorporate a lot of mechanics from the original board game into the plot. Each of the guests are asked to use an alias. There's numerous secret passages throughout the large Tudor mansion, and they even made 3 different endings, which I believe plays into the outcomes from a few rounds of the game itself. Each guest has been in a situation where, as Tim Curry's character Wadsworth puts it,
"For some considerable time, all of you have been paying what you can afford, and in some cases more than you can afford, to someone who threatens to expose you. And none of you know who's blackmailing you, do you?"
It turns out that hush money went to the same man, and it turns out that man is Mr. Body. When each receive a lethal weapon, Mr. Body winds up dead, and it becomes a mad dash to find out who done it. Behind the locked doors and barred windows, mass panic becomes a perfect opportunity to tie up loose ends, and everybody in the house has a motive. The best part is that, for a comedy, none of what's happening to the characters is really funny. Blackmail, murder, captivity, all things a normal person would find frightening to even comprehend, especially if they know that they're guilty. In fact, the whole setting is incredibly macabre, but for writer John Landis, a setup for situational comedy. Landis's previous work included Trading Places, The Blues Brothers, and Animal House, all straight comedies, but the 8 here are so dysfunctional that when the dark nature of the plot rears its head, the audience is immediately distracted by slapstick.
Sorry?
The score by John Morris sets the tone and is incredibly memorable, set to a tempest that isn't quelled until all the conflict in the film has been resolved. Clue is one of those movies that most people end up liking, but not many people pay homage to. I think it deserves it. A lot of fun and full of quotable quips. Let's take a look at the other side of the coin. John Landis ended up being too busy with his next film, Spies Like Us, to be involved with Clue's production, with both released in '85. This ultimately doomed the film's success direction-wise, as Landis's choice for director, Jonathan Lynn, had no prior experience. Landis had the 3 aforementioned films under his belt, and above all, respect from audiences. Throw Spies Like Us on there, and even if it still flopped, his name would have stood for something. You can feel the moment where his touch ceases to guide the picture, and then the focus was changed to ending it as quickly and as cheaply as possible. The multiple endings, one of my favorite parts about the movie, ended up hurting it. Landis fell in love with the idea of a Clue film and began ambitiously writing it. However, no matter the ways he attacked it, he couldn't settle on an ending. The multiple endings were devised to get past this, and as a way to get moviegoers to rewatch the film to see all 3 outcomes, but neither worked, and it seemed to exist purely so Landis and Lynn could avoid committing to the script. As Paramount heavily advertised, the 3 endings were meant to be a big selling point. Knowing this going in, you would have no reason to be attached enough to try and deduce who done it if everyone did it. They should have just done what they ended up doing on home video and showing all 3 endings at every theater, rather than making the audience run around from showing to showing, much like the characters do by the second half of the film. The choice on home video and on subsequent TV airings was probably one of the main factors that led to its cult success, making it feel like extra effort rather than what it was, a cheap way to squeeze moviegoers for the rest of the money they knew they wouldn't get without trying to double, or in this case triple, box office sales, and they still didn't break even. Even though Clue's script was halfway solid, production would be extremely strict, and improv was frowned upon. The only person who had a little leeway was Madeline Kahn, and the result was a few offbeat remarks here and there, and Mrs. White's minute-long tangent about the maid Yvette.
I hated her so much. Flames on the side of my face, heaving breaths.
The line between Kahn and White bleeds a little, and she finally looks at home in the role. This one scene gives an example of what could have happened if the leash were loosened a little bit, and more if Landis had stayed involved. The others wouldn't fare so well. Because of these restrictions, everyone looks kind of stiff and limited. The script is fair, and the wordplay is great, but there's something missing. The actors couldn't let themselves meld with their counterparts, and they never got comfortable, like wearing someone else's shoes. There wasn't a whole lot of world building happening. The one-liners and quips were funny, but as the gags end and the first murder happens, it thins out, and that's when the film drags on. Wadsworth is a good example, a great performance by Tim Curry, showing off some of his work from the stage, but again falls flat, not on Curry's end, but the two-dimensional aspect of unfinished work. Just as we start to see the past of his character, we're distracted when the murders happen, and then there's no more story development, at least until after we find out which ending we're in. A lot of the jokes during the post-murder scramble are really clever, but don't completely land because of the nature of the segment. If Landis had continued writing through Spies Like Us and polished it up with a 86-87 release date, it could have been much better. Or maybe, given his issues with the writing process, would have ended up just scrapping it. If they had just committed to the script, or rebuilt it with a single ending and reworked the overall pacing, it would be a true murder mystery. In the course of writing, they lost the heart of the film, a murder mystery. Before making it funny or changing the formula, you first have to build the foundation, or the whole thing falls apart when you add anything else. Even if the audience decided to stay invested in the plot, they'd see that the clues make no sense, and by the end they'd realize what they're watching is really a parody. This was a comedy first, whodunit second. The very genre they tried to break into took a backseat to irresolute laughter brought on by forced situational comedy. Despite all of this, it's still a fun experience and does have a lot of rewatch value, if only to catch the jokes you may have missed the first time. My only wish is that it'll be remembered creative-wise, and while keeping in mind what I pointed out, for the effort made by the cast and crew, as it is by its fans. This film should have been as much of a hit as the others that year. Clue was a great concept, and the product was indeed memorable, but when it came to execution, it didn't fit the bill, and instead, you left thinking about how it was almost a classic.